How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Coach Javi here, and today we're doing a quick breakdown on the Brighton and Chelsea match. What a performance from Brighton, 3-0 against Chelsea, and it's very interesting to see that scoreline considering Brighton only had 30% possession in that game, and I'm going to break it down and explain exactly why Brighton beat Chelsea and how they did it in such a convincing fashion. There's three concepts that I want to talk about in today's video. The first one is going to be Brighton's defense, the second one is going to be Brighton's attack, and then the third one is going to be the special players segment. I'm also going to do a quick little rating at the end of this video, who was the best player, who was the worst player, and what rating I'm going to give them out of 10. So if you guys want to do me a quick favor, pause this video, let me know in the comment section down below who you think was the man of the match and who was also the worst performer, and see if you get them right by sticking around to the end of this video. Let's get straight into it, guys. No wasting any time. We're going to start with Brighton's defense. The thing that impressed me a lot about Brighton is that when teams typically play a big team or a team that's really good in possession, has a lot of dangerous players and are comfortable on the ball, in training the week prior, you identify a specific system of how you're going to press, how you're going to regain possession of the ball, and how you're going to take advantage of the transition moments. But you typically do it in one area of the field. And what I mean by that is you decide whether you're going to play a low block, a mid block, a high block. Are you going to high press? Are you going to hunt for the ball? Are you going to cut off the passing lanes? What specifically are you going to do defensively to limit Chelsea's opportunities? However, Brighton actually had multiple approaches to how they were going to defend. They actually started the game in a higher block. I think the beginning of the game they wanted to high press while they still had a lot of energy and while they were still fresh. And this is actually where I think Brighton took the biggest risk. Chelsea trying to beat Brighton's high press actually did a really good job, and there was a couple of situations where they managed to break through the right side, specifically through Malo Gusto. And if you look at these situations, this is where I felt like if Chelsea had been just a little bit more clinical, we'd be talking about a completely different game, and this would be a very different tactical analysis. What Chelsea really want to do is get the ball wide to one of their wingers, and then from there see if they can create crossing opportunities, or their perfect scenario really is the cutback to Cole Palmer at the top of the box for him to be able to take a shot. Anytime you get Cole Palmer facing forward at the top of the box or inside the box, that is the prime moment for Chelsea to score goals. And in this match, it actually happened a couple of times because Chelsea were very good technically to break Brighton's high press, ultimately getting the ball to Cole Palmer in those positions, and unfortunately it was not Cole Palmer's day as far as his finishing. So these situations happened before Brighton scored their first goal, and as I was already starting to write down notes thinking about what could happen and what the outcome of this match would be, I was thinking that I was going to write this tactical analysis in favor of Chelsea. However, as the game went on, you could see how this specific formation, the 5-4-1 or the 5-2-3, actually really worked well for Brighton, especially when they were playing in a low block or a mid block and they let Chelsea have the ball. I've noticed that this 5-2-3 specifically, it's a variation of the 5-4-1 because basically what you're doing is you're tucking in those midfielders to make it a midfield line of 4. However, when you want to press just a little bit higher and cut off some passing lanes into those midfielders for Chelsea, you release those two wingers to join that target forward, and it almost creates a box around that midfield player for Chelsea, but it also cuts off those passing lanes to the wide players. It's the same tactic that I saw Plymouth Argyle use against Liverpool in their FA Cup match, and while it does leave a lot of space in certain areas, I think as long as the space between the lines is relatively tight, you're not really at that much danger. So I think it's okay to sit a little bit further back. The one thing that you do have to be prepared for is the long ball, and Chelsea actually looked for it quite a few times. However, the backline for Brighton was always well prepared. And this is a relatively simple concept. If there's no immediate pressure on the ball, you know that the other team is always going to look to go a little bit longer because they have the space. So Brighton made sure that their defenders were always a few yards behind the Chelsea forwards. And the multiple times that Chelsea tried to play the long ball, Brighton were very well prepared. The other benefit of not just playing in a low block, but playing in a backline of 5 is that anytime Chelsea did manage to get the ball out wide and go 1 versus 1, even if they were able to beat that first wing back, the third center back would just step out, and it basically always makes it a 1 versus 2 in wide areas. And as long as that midfield line also drops back and closes the space to the attacking central midfielders for Chelsea, there was really very little that Chelsea could do except hope that Brighton would get a little bit stretched out or make a mistake. I do feel like Chelsea could have moved the ball a little bit quicker just to get Brighton out of position, and what they should have done is something that Brighton also did, which we're going to talk about in the next concept, and that's continue to find ways to draw Brighton out. So I was pretty impressed with Brighton's defending, and also the fact that they had multiple ways of defending in the low block, the mid block, and the high block. They didn't just settle for one, and ultimately, even though they took the risk of doing it higher up the field and maybe not having as much success against Chelsea in that, they made the correct adjustments and their backline was prepared for everything, which means they were able to keep a clean sheet against Chelsea, which is not easy considering how many really good attacking players that Chelsea has. However, what impressed me more than Brighton's defending is Brighton's attacking. Once again, Brighton impressed me for the fact that they didn't have one single attacking system. They were comfortable in the build-out, breaking Chelsea's press at times, and then they were also comfortable with the long ball catching Chelsea off guard. Everyone knows Brighton has always been a technically very good team. For the last few years, even under different managers, they were always comfortable in building out of the back, and their positional play was so good with the players that they did have that over the years they've been able to break the high press from multiple really good teams. And I think the important thing to understand is that at the end of the day, whatever your attacking system is, the ultimate goal is to create enough chances to score more goals than the other team. So I'm not a big believer that you always have to build out. I'm also not a big believer that you should always play long. I think there needs to be a balance. Brighton did this really well in the first goal. If you notice, they were actually higher up the field. They didn't feel comfortable with the numbers. Chelsea were very well organized. So what they did was they actually played the ball back all the way to Verbruggen, the goalkeeper. And now when you play the ball back to the goalkeeper, especially against a team like Chelsea who's not just going to sit in a low block, is it starts to stretch out the space between the lines. And going back to the beginning of this video where I said you have to be prepared for the long ball, once Chelsea got stretched out and Verbruggen had the ball, he noticed that they weren't in the right positions and it was a 1-versus-1 with Mitoma and Chalobah. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that was the right decision just because Mitoma had a lot to do with that ball. It was a great ball, but when you think about the physical battle between Mitoma and Chalobah, you're probably not going to want to play a lot of long balls. However, the top class technical quality from Mitoma to take a beautiful first touch out of the air, cut inside and have a finish is probably the reason why Brighton ultimately ended up winning the game. And I also want to give a shout out to Japanese players because I have a lot of respect for the way that the Japanese develop their players. A huge focus is put on the technical training and the technical development of their players. Anytime I've ever played with Japanese players or I watch them play, you can see the difference versus the rest of the world in how technically clean they are with their first touch and their manipulation of the ball. So while I think that Brighton did a really good job of stretching Chelsea out and playing the long ball, it had more to do with the fact that Mitoma's technical quality allowed him to create something from that play. And I think in the times where Chelsea really applied a lot of pressure and didn't allow the goalkeeper or the center backs to play the long ball, Brighton was very comfortable, specifically in that formation, to be able to find the outlets. Whenever you play with a back three and wing backs, you typically use them as the outlets when you're under a lot of pressure. And the fact that you have 3 center backs instead of 2 gives you a little bit more width out of the back to be able to have different players to get on the ball before you eventually find the outlet. And this is where the positional play and the patterns that they do in training really paid off. At no point in the match did Brighton ever look flustered or under way too much pressure from Chelsea. They always knew where they needed to play the ball, and they were comfortable in resetting play back to the goalkeeper and moving the ball quickly to try and unorganize Chelsea. And this is where I want to highlight the third goal. Before the goal was scored, Brighton actually had the ball for a very long time, resetting play back to the goalkeeper, getting forward, continuing to move the ball until they eventually got into a dangerous position with Mitoma. Mitoma loses the ball for only a couple of seconds before Brighton win it back. Eventually it gets to Minte and Minte scores the goal. Considering the fact that when you look at the stats and it says that Brighton only had 30% possession, it almost seems misleading the fact that they were so comfortable on the ball anytime they had it. They were not just playing the counter attack. Anytime they had the ball, they were very calculated with their passes. They understood where they needed to get the ball, and ultimately it reflected in a lot of good opportunities for Brighton. And even more interesting than the stat of possession is the expected goals. Brighton had 1.42 expected goals to Chelsea's 0.54. Brighton had 13 total shots to Chelsea's 8, and 5 of those shots were on target, while keeping Chelsea to 0 shots on target throughout the 90 minutes of the match. 5 big chances for Brighton, 1 big chance for Chelsea, and all of this in a match where Brighton had 251 passes and Chelsea had 664. And I think this is a trend that we're starting to see in modern day football. The lore and entertainment of the tiki-taka style of play is starting to wear down. People are starting to realize that possession doesn't mean as much as it used to, because teams are starting to use tactics that don't rely on possession. And so while it's really nice to want to have the ball and to have the ball the majority of the game, it's much nicer to be a lot more dangerous when you do actually have the ball. So let's finish this video off with the special player segment. This is a segment, if you guys have been watching some of these tactical analysis, you guys already know that I put this in because we can talk about tactics, we can break games down and analyze the positioning and the formations and all of that. But the reality is that when you have good players and when you also have bad players, they're all going to affect the game. There's 2 players specifically for Brighton that I thought had a really good performance. The first one, obviously, is Yankuba Minte. His performance today and the amount of stamina and fitness that he has playing in a wing back position, which is a very tough position to play just because the amount of running, I thought he played it extremely well. It actually reminded me of N'Golo Kante. The amount of running and the amount of things that Kante did on defense and in the attack is kind of exactly what we saw from Yankuba Minte today. When you have players who have an engine like that, you have much higher chances of actually winning the game. The next player, obviously I already mentioned him, Mitoma. He's only getting better and better, and his technical ability allows him to do things that requires him not to have maybe the physical presence of some of the other players, especially when you're matching up against players like Chalobah and Colwill, who are always going to be physically stronger than you. You have to find ways to be able to beat them. And so Kaoru Mitoma, specifically with that first touch on the goal, but also just the technical ability and the decision making that he has, and the ability to get into the right spaces to not have someone pressuring you right away, is something that's so beneficial for a team like Brighton, who in possession and on the ball are super comfortable. So for those two players, I'm going to give Yankuba Minte a rating of 9 out of 10 and Kaoru Mitoma a rating of 8.5 out of 10. Two players for Chelsea that I thought really underperformed and had a bad game, and this is something that they've been struggling with since the beginning of the season. Everyone was questioning why they hadn't signed a really experienced center back. Levi Colwill and Trevor Chalobah had some pretty bad performances. Chalobah not only got absolutely dusted by Kaoru Mitoma on the first goal, but he also had a poor clearance that ultimately led to the second goal. And then I was very disappointed at how easy Levi Colwill went down for that third goal, trying to get a foul for minimal contact, and then the worst part about it is he stayed there on the ground. He didn't get back up quickly, and ultimately the ball fell to the player that he should have been marking. And if he would have gotten up and stopped complaining at the referee, he may have actually had a chance in stopping that third goal. Not that it would have made a big difference that late in the game, but I think 2 goals still gives you the opportunity to be able to come back. 3 goals, the game is done and dusted. So that's it for this one, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are on the game in the comment section down below. If you appreciated this tactical analysis and this breakdown, make sure you guys are subscribing, because I'm trying to give you guys as many of these as possible on top of pre-match previews and all sorts of other type of content. That's it for this one, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.